The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Everybody. Like Crystal said, this is making sense of the Power BI ecosystem. So I'd like to say thanks to Crystal for organizing this and setting this up, and thanks to Pragmatic Works for hosting this. My name's Dustin Ryan. I'm a data platform solution architect. I've been working in the analytics space for the past 10 years, designing Microsoft BI solutions. I got my start with Pragmatic Works. I worked with Pragmatic Works for 7 years designing data warehouses and ETL solutions and working with reporting services in Power BI. And now I'm with Microsoft and in the education team, so I'm working with our universities and K-12 school districts and helping them build analytic solutions on Microsoft Stack, including Azure. You can find my blog at SQLdusty.com. I'm a published author and technical editor and do a lot of speaking around the country, and I really enjoy doing that. And I'm a self-proclaimed baby wrangler and chicken farmer. So I live in Jacksonville, Florida with my wife and my 3 kids. We kind of live on the farm, so I've got some chickens and some animals we take care of, and so we have a good time doing that. There's me and my wife and my kids, and Halloween we like to dress up in themed costumes, and so there's our Star Wars costumes, and that's Andrew. Andrew was Yoda, and my daughter Dallas is Rey, and Bradley was Luke Skywalker from at the Battle of Hoth. So we have a good time doing that. What we're going to be talking about today is really what is Power BI. A lot of times when people say, "Oh, we're using Power BI," you know, they mean something specific by that, but it's really a result of them not really understanding what are the pieces of the ecosystem. Sometimes I work with customers and they say, "Oh, we're using Power BI on premises," and all that really means to them is that they have downloaded the desktop tool and they're using the desktop tool, right? But that's really just one piece of the ecosystem, right? And if you're only using, you know, for instance, Power BI desktop, right, you're really missing out on what the rest of the ecosystem offers you. Or they say, "Oh, we're using, you know, Power BI in the cloud," and then they don't really understand that there's a desktop tool that they could be using to design their models and add calculations and do all those sorts of things. And so the goal of this session here is to give us an overview of the ecosystem. So we're going to talk about Power BI desktop. We're going to talk about how does Excel fit into the picture. We'll talk about the Power BI service, you know, PowerBI.com. We'll talk about the data gateway. We're going to talk about Power BI Premium, Power BI Embedded. We'll talk about Power BI Report Server, and we'll talk about the Power BI mobile apps and maybe some other things if we have some time. And so the goal here is to give you a good overview of the ecosystem. What are the pieces of the ecosystem? How do they fit together? And the purpose here is to eliminate this confusion and provide clarity on when do you use what pieces. Power BI has changed a lot in the last year. If you watched the announcements, if you watched any of the recordings of the Business Application Summit, or you were fortunate enough to be able to actually attend in person, you saw a whole lot of things that are coming down the pipe for Power BI as far as new features and new capabilities. And everything, if you didn't get a chance to watch that, go look up the videos and the recordings for the Business Application Summit. Everything that they showed in the demos is going to be released within the next 3 months. So there's going to be some big things coming in the next 3 months. And with that said, Power BI is changing very quickly. And there's a lot of moving parts. And because of this, it can really be confusing sometimes when you start thinking about, okay, well, you know, when do I use what piece of the ecosystem? Where do I do what? All those sorts of things. Now, one of the things that I put together to kind of help us make sense of this whole ecosystem is this nifty little diagram. This is a Visio diagram that I put together, and I use this, and sometimes I use this with my discussions and demonstrations with customers so that they can get an overall view of the ecosystem and how do the different pieces relate to one another. Now, a couple things I'll point out here is you have the Power BI desktop represented on the left side, and I flag that with a number 1. You've got Excel here. You've got SQL Server data tools for developing your paginated reports. You've got Power BI Report Server. You've got the data gateway. Then you get the stuff in the Power BI service, right? Our data sets we deploy, reports we deploy or publish, the dashboards we create. We'll talk about Power BI Premium, Embedded, custom apps and how we can embed Power BI reports and visualizations in our apps. And then we'll also talk about Excel and the mobile apps. But I put this diagram together so you can kind of see how everything lines up, how all the different pieces connect to one another, and what a flow of data might look like through the Power BI ecosystem. You can download this at sqldusty.com in a PDF or in a PNG format, and use this with your learning for Power BI, and I hope that you'll do that. So we'll talk about, let's start with, one other thing I'll mention here quickly. All of these little numbers here, there's a Word document I've put together that has a key in there that goes with these numbers. And so if you pull up the Word document, you'll see that number 1 has a description about what Power BI is, and then the link to the documentation for the Power BI desktop, and same thing for like Excel and the data gateway and all these different pieces. There's a Word doc that goes along with this that describes each of these components, sort of what they do, and then provides links to the documentation. So take a look at that. I hope that'll be helpful for you. So if you've never heard of Power BI before, and I'm just going to assume at this point that most everyone here in this webinar has at least heard of Power BI or has at least used some piece of it, but we're going to pretend like you haven't heard of Power BI, so we're going to start from ground zero here. Power BI is a cloud-based analytics and reporting platform. It's really an ecosystem of products and services that run in Microsoft's cloud that allow you to build data models, build reports on those data models, and then build dashboards based on reports. With Power BI, I can connect to a very wide range of data sources. So if you've ever gone in and played with the Power BI desktop, you know that there's a very extensive list of data sources that you have available to you. I can connect to everything from files like CSV files, text files. I can pull in JSON documents, XML files. I can pull in the data from a SQL database. I can pull in data from Oracle, Sybase, Teradata, all kinds of different places, SAP HANA. I can pull in data from the cloud. It can be in Azure. It can be like an Azure SQL database or Azure SQL Data Warehouse or Azure Analysis Services. Or I can pull in data that lives in somebody else's cloud. I could pull in data from Amazon Redshift or Google BigQuery. There's all kinds of different data sources here. And so Power BI lets us connect to these wide range of data sources and then build data models. Marco Russo had a really great white paper that I encourage you to go take a look at. But Power BI is a model-based reporting tool, unlike a report-based reporting tool. So if you think of like a tool like SQL Server Reporting Services, right? That's a report-based tool because I'm developing reports that have queries embedded into it, and then I bring that data into it and I build tables or charts or whatever I'm going to do that. And all the logic for those reports is all contained within one of those reports. Power BI is different than that because it's a data modeling based tool, and it's a tool that I design a data model, and I can build many reports that use that data model as the data source. So Power BI is a data modeling based reporting tool, and it lets me build really great data models that bring data from one or more locations, and then I can mash that data up. I can apply cleansing logic. I can transform the data drastically. I can combine tables together. I can do pivots. I can do aggregations. I can apply statistical functions. I can even write R against the data, and then I can transform the data and get it into whatever format I want it to, and load that data into my model. And then once I build this great model, then I have the flexibility to design a number of reports based on that model. So I can build as many reports as I want on that model, and leverage and use the really flexible and interactive visualizations that Power BI is known for. Now, once I build those reports, and once I build my data model and I build my reports, then I've got to be able to give other people access to it, right? And so with Power BI Service, I can distribute that to any user on any device. That's one of the great things about Power BI being a cloud-based analytics tool, is that whether your users are using MacBooks, whether they're using Chromebooks, whether they're using Surface devices or laptops, whether they're using an iPhone or an Android phone or whatever, an iPad, it doesn't matter. They're going to be able to get to the visualizations that you're building and sharing with them. I can also share my reports publicly too. So if I have a requirement to build a report and I want to share it with everybody out on the internet, I can do that. I can do that as well. Now, I hope that gives you a high-level overview of sort of what is Power BI. But what we're going to start with is with the Power BI desktop. We're going to start right here, and we're going to talk about kind of go through the pieces of the ecosystem here. We'll talk about what they are, what they do, how a developer might use them, how a user might use them, is there a cost associated with them, all those sorts of things, so that way you have a good idea of how the different pieces of the ecosystem work. And when you, in whatever role you might be in, whether you're a business analyst, whether you're an architect, whether you're an IT director, whether you're a CIO, somebody like that, when you might use the pieces, these different pieces of the ecosystem. Okay, so Power BI Desktop is the main authoring and publishing tool for Power BI. And I noticed in the poll when Crystal asked, what parts of the Power BI ecosystem are you using? The majority of the answers were in the Power BI Desktop. And that makes sense, right? And that's what I tell my customers too, is that if you're trying to figure out, well, how do I start, where do I start working with Power BI? What's the best way to start, right? Probably going to start with Power BI Desktop because you can download it from the internet. It's free. There's no cost associated with it. You'll see there at the last bullet point, it costs $0, right? So everybody in the world can download Power BI Desktop, whether they're a Microsoft customer or not, whether we've got your email address and can spam you or not, it doesn't matter. You can download Power BI Desktop for free. And it's the main authoring and publishing tool for Power BI. Now, I'll mention here, it's not the only way that I can author content for Power BI, but it's probably the main way. And so with Power BI Desktop, you can connect to a data source like a SQL Server or an Oracle database or an analysis services model, and I can bring that data in and I can clean it up. I can build a model, I can mash my data up, and then I can build my reports. Now, because of that, this is typically going to be a tool that a developer or a power user is going to use to create brand new data models and reports from scratch. Now, you don't have to have a ton of technical expertise to gain a lot of value from Power BI Desktop. The customers that I work with, I found that they have people that are not necessarily come with a technical background, but they still gain a lot of value out of Power BI Desktop. But I will say that if you come from a technical background, that's going to give you an advantage over those people that don't, because in Power BI Desktop, 95% of what you need to do in Power BI Desktop you can do without writing code, right? If I know the connection string for SQL Server, right, I can suck that data in. I can click the tables I want to bring in. I can apply cleansing logic, which can be done through the GUI. You don't have to write any functions to clean your data up. You don't even have to write functions to build calculations, right? But if you know the query language if you know Power Query, which is the query language Power BI Desktop uses, if you know DAX, which is the expression language Power BI uses, you're going to have an advantage when you're building your content. So that's why I put on here that this is probably going to be primarily a developer and a power user tool, not necessarily explicitly restricted to developers and power users, but those folks are probably going to be the ones that gain the most value out of Power BI Desktop. Now, Power BI Desktop gets installed on the developer workstation, so you can download that and install it on your laptop. You can download it and install it wherever you do your development work. Okay. There's two places where you can get it. You can download it from powerbi.com. You can download it from the Windows Store. And if you download it from the Windows Store, whenever a new update comes out, it'll automatically update on your machine. And so you don't have to go down and update it every month. Now, another thing I'll mention here is that Power BI Desktop gets updated once a month. So the Power BI engineering team has a very aggressive development cadence. They release an update to Power BI Desktop once a month. Now, these updates that they're releasing are not little insignificant updates like we changed a font or we moved a text box or we added a menu or something like that. These are significant updates. Like in the last month, one of the things they released was the ability to design models that we call composite models, where you can bring data in and import it into Power BI, and you can also have certain tables that will directly query an underlying data source. So for instance, if I've got an Excel file on my desktop, but I also have access to a SQL Server data warehouse, right? I can have Power BI directly query SQL Server data warehouse while using an in-memory copy of that Excel file. I'm importing that Excel file. That's an update that just came out in the last month. So these monthly updates are incredibly significant updates. So you always want to make sure that you're working with the latest version. And like I said, you can download from powerbi.com. If you just go out to powerbi.com, you click on products, you click on desktop, and that will give you the link. I put the link here in the slide deck too, so you can click on it if you want to do that. You can also download from the Microsoft Store. So if you're on Windows 10, you just go in the Microsoft Store, you do a search for Power BI Desktop, you'll find it there, and you can download it and install it. So just to kind of recap, Power BI Desktop is the main authoring and publishing tool that you'll use to create your data models and create your reports. Not the only way to create data models and reports, but the main way to create the data models and reports. All right, so let's move on. All right, let's talk about Excel. Okay, now Excel has a special relationship with Power BI because Power BI is based on some of those old Excel BI technologies that some of you are probably very familiar with using. So if you've used Power Pivot, if you've used Power Query, if you've used Power View, whether it was Power View in Excel or Power View in SharePoint, right, then you're going to notice a lot of things in Power BI are going to seem very familiar. And Power BI is based on those technologies. And I tell my customers that if Power Pivot and Power Query and Power View had a baby, it'd be Power BI. And so Power BI is sort of the baby of these technologies. And so in Excel, if you've used Power Pivot, right, you know that you can design a data model in Excel. I can pull in data from SQL Server, I can pull in data from multiple places, and then I can load it into an in-memory data model in Power Pivot. And then once I build my Power Pivot data model, I can then browse that data model using pivot tables and pivot charts and Power View, okay? You can also use Power Query in Excel to clean your data sets up. Now, Excel is probably going to be used by developers and power users from the data modeling aspect, but we know most everybody uses Excel, right? Everybody builds pivot tables, everybody builds pivot charts, right? And you'd be hard pressed to find a user in your organization that didn't know how to use Excel, right? Because everybody uses it, right? Obviously, Excel gets installed on your local workstation. And in order to build Power Pivot models and build and use Power Query and Power View, right? There's no cost associated with these BI technologies that come built into Excel, right? Now, obviously, Excel comes with it. There's a certain amount of cost associated with Excel, you know, whether you're using Office 365 or whatever. But to use Power Pivot and Power Query and Power View, there is no cost associated with that. So if you have a background with Excel, you can start using these technologies. Now, the really cool part about these technologies in Excel is that, say you've done a lot of work in Power Pivot and you have this really great Power Pivot model, right? And now you want to bring that over into Power BI. Well, how do you do that? Well, Power BI Desktop has a really nice function, and even the Power BI service, you can do this. You can actually take a Power Pivot model and import it into Power BI and convert it into a Power BI data model, and then begin to build Power BI reports. If you have any Power View reports that are in your Excel workbook, those will be converted to the maximum extent into a Power BI report. So if you've done things in Power View in an Excel workbook, if you've done things in Power Pivot in Excel, you can actually convert those into Power BI reports and data models. So you don't have to start from scratch. If you've already made a big investment in Excel data models and you sort of use Excel as your go-to BI tool, then you're going to be able to convert those things into Power BI assets, which is really nice. You don't have to build everything from the ground up. Now, Excel also has some really great capabilities with Power BI. A lot of times I go to customers and there's this hardcore group of data people, and they don't really care about the really cool data models you can build in Power BI. They don't really care about the charts and interactive visualizations you can build in Power BI. At the end of the day, they want to know, what is the fastest way I can get rows and rows of data into Excel? I don't care about the charts. I don't care about the graphs. I just want to see some rows of data in Excel. And every organization has those kind of people. So there's a great plugin for Excel called the Power BI Publisher for Excel, and you can download this for free too. It's a plugin for Excel. Power BI Publisher for Excel will let you browse data models that you have permissions on in Power BI with a pivot table or a pivot chart in Excel. So those users that at your organization that they just want to look at pivot tables and pivot charts and they just want to live in Excel, right? You can meet the requirements for those users. The great part about this is that we can move away from Excel hell, where we've got spreadsheets full of data just floating all over the place. We don't know who's looking at them. We don't know if they should have permissions to view that data. right? I can build a central data model in Power BI and let the users that want to use Power BI to browse those data models, they can do that. If I have users that want to use Excel to browse those Power BI data models, those users can do that too. The great part about that is that I can build a data model, manage it in one place, wrap security around it using Power BI, but let the user pick the tool that they want to use to browse those data models. Those that want to do Excel to those that want to use Excel to do that, they can do that. Those that you want to use Power BI to do that, they can do that. And I've got one central place where I'm managing my calculations, managing my hierarchies, managing KPIs, managing the calculations, all in one place, managing security, all in one place. And the users are deciding whether they want to use Excel, whether they want to use Power BI. In the future, they'll also be able to select a different kind of tool to use that. Those users that want to use Tableau, they'll also be able to browse Power BI data models using Tableau or other technologies that are out there. So you have one place to manage your data models and let the user pick the tool. Very cool stuff. Now, moving on to the Power BI service. The Power BI service is the online software as a service where we publish the data models, we publish the reports, and we build our dashboards. So everything that we've talked about so far has been restricted to just a user's desktop, right? We run Excel on our desktop and we run Power BI desktop on our desktop, right? Our laptop or our local machine, right? But once we're ready to give other people access to that, we have to publish that to the Power BI service. And the Power BI service is where the data models, the reports, and the dashboards live at. The Power BI service is also where we take care of administration, where we facilitate sharing and collaboration. That's where we manage all of those things. That's where we manage administration of the work groups. That's where we administer the apps that we're sharing with people. That's where we administer, what content are we making public to the world if we want to put something on the website or something like that. So all the admin is going to happen here in the Power BI service. And this is where sharing and collaboration happens. So pretend we're working on a project together, right? And I'm going to set up what we call a workspace. And a workspace is just a collaboration group. I'm setting up a workspace and I'm adding you as a member into that workspace. Maybe you have edit permissions, maybe you just have read-only permissions, but that's where I set up sharing and collaboration. We can work together in that workspace. We can also build apps based on the workspace. And an app is just a way for me to sort of expose the content of a workspace to users in a read-only type format. Okay. Now, because of this is where the administration, this is where sharing and collaboration happens. You can also do some development in the Power BI service. Because of that, most everyone uses the Power BI service. If you're using Power BI, you're probably using the Power BI service in one way or another, right? So if you're a developer, you're probably working in Power BI desktop, building some content there, and publishing it up into the service to collaborate with your team, to get validation, to share with the power users, to share with the end users, right? If you're a consumer, then you might not be using Power BI desktop, but you're logging in. You're logging into powerbi.com, you're looking at the content that you have permissions on, and you're viewing it, and you're slicing and dicing the data, and you're doing whatever you're going to do with your data there. If you're a power user, you're probably doing a little bit of both of those things, right? You're publishing with Power BI desktop, maybe you're looking at other stuff Power BI that other users are sharing with you, and then if you're an admin, you're definitely taking care of administration here, right? You're making sure that the right people are getting access to the right data. Now, the Power BI service, there is a cost associated with this. So far, everything we've talked about so far has been free, right? Power BI desktop is free, Excel is free. There is a cost to the Power BI service, right? There is a pro license, which starts at about $10 per person per month, okay? So the pro license is required for users that want to share and collaborate with other users. So if you think about the scenario that we're talking about, right, where I'm gonna set up a workspace, I'm gonna share with you, you're gonna log in and look at the stuff I'm sharing with you, right? We would both need a pro license for that because we're sharing and collaborating together. Like I said, that's about $10 per person per month, okay? There's also a Power BI free license, which gives you access to the Power BI service for free. It doesn't have any sharing features with it, okay? So if you're doing Power BI on your own, just working by yourself, maybe you've got maybe you're doing some sort of BI on the side, you're doing a little Black Ops BI, right? IT doesn't know about it and you're just kind of doing BI on your own, right? Then you don't need a pro license probably. You probably just need the free license. With the free license, I can suck in some data into Power BI desktop, I can publish it up into the cloud, and then I can access it from any device, whether it's my iPhone, whether it's through the browser, whether it's at home on the iPad. I can do that for free. So that doesn't require a pro license. But when we want to share and collaborate with everyone, then we're going to need a pro license. Now there's also another piece here. It's called Power BI Premium. And Power BI Premium is an add-on to Power BI Pro. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but all I'll say about Premium is that Premium is a way for me to facilitate sharing across a wider organization without having to purchase everyone a pro license. So if you work for a very particularly large organization, maybe you have 10,000 people in your company that you work for, and most everyone at the company, they don't need to be able to share and collaborate with other users. They just need to be able to log in and look at their data. That's where Premium is going to come into play. Now, there's a lot of other features that Premium has. We're going to go into that in more detail here in a little bit, but I just wanted to mention that Premium here is an add-on for Power BI Pro and is a way for us to facilitate sharing across all the users in our organization without having to purchase a pro license for everybody and their brother. Okay. So that's the Power BI service. We talked about Power BI Desktop, Excel, the Power BI service. Now there's another piece here that I want to mention, and it's called the Power BI Data Gateway. The Power BI Data Gateway acts as a bridge between the Power BI service and your on-premises data sources. So whether I'm leveraging direct query or import or live query, if I'm accessing data that is on premises in my data center or in a virtual machine, whether that's on premises or in Azure, I'm going to need the data gateway to facilitate that connection between the Power BI service and my data sources. Okay, so when we talk about direct query or import or live query, right? Direct query is when Power BI builds a query in a native querying language like T-SQL and sends that down to the underlying data source. So for instance, if I had a SQL Server database and maybe it was a really large database, maybe it's like 10 terabytes, right? That's too much data to import into Power BI. So I'm going to leave it there in the SQL Server, and I'm going to have Power BI access that SQL Server database that's 10 terabytes in a direct query format. So that means that when a user clicks on a chart, it generates a T-SQL query and sends that down to the data gateway. The data gateway sends that down to the data warehouse. Data warehouse sends the results back, and I get to see the results in my chart in the Power BI service. Now I can also import data into Power BI. I could import data out of SQL Server, but there are also certain data sources that only support import, like an Excel file or a CSV file or something like that. I could import that data into Power BI. And so in order to periodically refresh that, we're going to need to we're going to need to set up that data gateway so that the refresh can take place. Live query refers to analysis services, and of course Power BI can directly query analysis services. But in any of those scenarios, we're going to need the data gateway set up. Now there's two ways to configure the Power BI data gateway. You can configure it in what we call an enterprise setup, and you can also configure it in what we call a personal mode. Now there's a few differences between the enterprise and the personal mode. If you're using the Power BI free service, then you'll be using the personal mode. And basically the personal mode is just can only be used for one person, and it is used in an import scenarios where I've got maybe an Excel file, a SQL database, a CSV file, and I want to import the data into Power BI. I could set up the data gateway in personal mode, and I could facilitate that scheduled refresh. Now, if you're working with Power BI in an organization, you'll probably need the enterprise mode. And the enterprise mode will set up a data gateway that can be shared across many users, and it can access many different data sources, and you can set it up for direct query scenarios, import, or live query, right? And now this is typically going to be installed and managed by somebody in IT or your Power BI administrator, okay? Now the admin will set up the data gateway, install it somewhere within your environment that has line of sight to the data sources that Power BI needs to access, and we'll manage it there, okay? This is also how you control users that will deploy reports that should use the gateway. So I can grant users special access to deploy reports that should use the data gateway. There's no cost associated with the data gateway, right? You just get access to it when you start using the Power BI service. Now, if you're not using the Power BI service, you don't need the data gateway. If you are using the Power BI service and you want to facilitate direct query, import, or live query, you do need the data gateway. Okay. Now, one thing I want to clarify that I mentioned earlier is that if you are accessing data that is on premises in your environment, you need the data gateway. So that means that if you're using a platform as a service technology like Azure SQL database, you don't need the data gateway for that. If you're using Azure Analysis Services, you do not need the data gateway for that. If you're using Azure SQL Data Warehouse, you don't need the data gateway for that, because those are services that exist in Azure in the cloud. Power BI already has the ability to connect to those. We don't need the data gateway for those sorts of data sources. Now, if I'm using a virtual machine in Azure, I still need the data gateway for that. And that's because really virtual machines are just virtual networks in Azure are just an extension of your network into the cloud. And so in order to access those, we still would need the data gateway set up somewhere that has line of sight to those virtual machines. So I hope that's clear. You can download the data gateway here. I got the link for it. This screenshot just shows the differences between the on-premises data gateway, the enterprise setup. That's the top one here, and then you've got the Power BI personal gateway. That's the bottom one here. And you'll see the differences here. If I'm using personal gateway, it can only be used by one person, and it only supports a scheduled refresh. If I'm using the enterprise, then it can be shared and used by multiple users. It supports scheduled refresh and live query and direct query, and you can also use this for some of the other technologies that exist in Azure as well, beyond Power BI, such as Power Apps, Logic Apps, and Microsoft Flow. So I wanted to make sure I put that in here too. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about Power BI Premium. We talked about this a few slides ago, but I wanted to definitely dedicate some time to this because this is an important part of the Power BI ecosystem. Power BI Premium provides resources that are dedicated to running the Power BI service for your organization or team, which gives you more dependable performance and larger data volumes. Premium also enables widespread distribution of content without requiring you to purchase a per user license for all of your viewers, and we talked about that a few moments ago. Now, you can take advantage of Power BI Premium by assigning workspaces to a premium capacity. So when I purchase premium capacity, what I'm really purchasing is a dedicated resource for my organization. And I have the flexibility to assign workspaces to premium capacity or use it on shared capacity. Now, when we talk about Power BI Premium, typically this is going to be most useful for organizations that need to share Power BI content across a very wide range of users. And what do I mean by wide range? I mean more than just a couple hundred or a few hundred people. Typically, when we're talking about Power BI Premium, we're talking about giving access to users that are in the thousands, right? We want to give access to thousands of people at one time. Okay. So when I purchase Power BI Premium, what I'm really purchasing is dedicated capacity for running the Power BI service for your organization. Okay. So there's a fixed amount of resources that come along with those Power BI Premium nodes that you purchase. Now, Power BI Premium gives you some additional capabilities just beyond giving read access to your free users as well as your pro users. It also supports embedding visualizations and custom applications. So imagine I've got this application and I want to put Power BI reports in the application. I don't want users to go to the Power BI portal to access that stuff. I want them to actually see the reports and visualizations in the application. Power BI Premium is a way for us to do that. Now, Power BI Premium is not a per user licensing, it's licensed at a capacity level. So it's sort of like buying a VM. When I want to buy a VM in Azure, right, I find the VM size that I want, I get a certain amount of CPU, I get a certain amount of RAM, right? And Power BI Premium is the same way, right? You get a certain amount of capacity. There's a certain number of CPUs and RAM that you get when you buy that Power BI Premium capacity. Now, for you to understand why Power BI Premium is important and why it could possibly be a good fit for your organization, let's drill in a little bit more detail about what is the Power BI Premium service. Like I said, Power BI Premium is an add-on that you purchase for Power BI Pro, and it's basically your own private server running Power BI in Azure. Now, if you think about Power BI, aside from Power BI Premium, pretend Premium doesn't exist for a second. Let's just pretend that all we have is the Power BI service. There's no Power BI Premium. Power BI, so if we're talking about the Power BI service, aside from Premium, Power BI runs on a cluster of machines that all of the Power BI customers use. It's a shared environment. Because of this, Power BI replaces restrictions on how much capacity and resources that an individual can use so that no one single customer has a really negative experience, right? And so if you're a little mom and pop, brick and mortar store and you do some analytics on your retail data, right, and use the Power BI service, and you happen to be using the same cluster machines as Walmart, right? You wouldn't want Walmart to completely just obliterate the experience for that small customer, right? And so there are certain thresholds and throttles in place to keep one customer from completely ruining the experience for everyone else. But what happens with Power BI Premium, you get your own dedicated capacity. So every customer that purchases Power BI Premium gets their own dedicated capacity. And so because the capacity of Power BI Premium service belongs to you, this allows many of those restrictions and limitations of the Power BI service to be lifted, giving you greater control over how the resources dedicated to your Power BI service are managed. So so some of the things that happen when you purchase Power BI Premium is I can give access to whichever users I want to. Now everyone doesn't have to have a pro license. I can give access to the free users too. This also means that I have much greater capacity for data volume. This also means that I can refresh my data as many times as I want during a day. There's no more restrictions over how often we can refresh. And there's a lot of other things that Power BI Premium offers you, but at the end of the day, because it's a dedicated capacity for you, you have a lot more flexibility over how you leverage that capacity. So what does this mean from a licensing perspective? All right, say you have a requirement to distribute Power BI reports and dashboards to your entire organization, or at least to a larger number of members of your organization. So prior to Power BI Premium, you would need to purchase a Power BI Pro license for the development team, and those are the folks over there on the left, the dark blue guys that have all the P's on. They all got to have Pro licenses because they're developing, they're sharing, they're administering the content. But you'd also have to have a Pro license for the consumers of the content. The consumers are the purple people over here on the right. They all have to have Pro licenses too. Now, because of everyone's got to have Pro licenses, this could make life difficult for you if you had a large number of users wishing to access your Power BI content. If you were using per user licensing for 30,000 users, it'd be really difficult to manage, it'd be expensive, and it'd just be a headache. Now, what happens with Power BI Premium, we now have the flexibility to deploy our Power BI content to this dedicated capacity. This would allow members of our organization to access the Power BI content without needing a Pro license. Because it's my capacity, I have more flexibility over who gets access to that content, and so I can give my consumers access to the premium content without them having to have a Pro license. They can just all be free users, okay? Now this also means that because it's my capacity, I can scale up when I need to. So if I need more resources, maybe my user base grows a lot and I need more resources, I can scale that up. I can purchase more capacity. This also means that I can embed my content in Power BI, in SharePoint Online. I can embed it in Teams. I can embed it in custom apps. I can embed it in websites. I can do all those sorts of things. So very cool stuff. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense about when Power BI Premium could be potentially useful for your organization. Now let's talk about Power BI Embedded. And we're running out of time here, so I'm going to try to move quickly to get through the rest of these slide decks, and I want to make sure I leave time for questions at the end. But Power BI Embedded is a way for ISVs and developers and other customers to have added flexibility in how they embed visualizations and analytics and intelligence into their apps using the Power BI APIs. Now, ISVs and developers can take advantage of a very minimized development effort to achieve sort of faster time to market and differentiate themselves by infusing Microsoft's Power BI analytics engine into their app. Now, equally, developers can spend time focusing on their solutions to meet customer demands instead of developing visual analytics features. Power BI Embedded enables you to work within a familiar development environment, developing in Visual Studio, developing in Azure, which you're probably already using if you're using Power BI, and I can embed my reports and my visualizations into my app. I can scale up, I can scale down, I can pause services, and take advantage of the flexibility of developing in the cloud. Now, Power BI Embedded While Power BI Premium does allow me to embed content in my apps, Power BI Embedded is different than Power BI Premium. Okay, so just to point that out, Power BI Premium lets me do embedding as well, but Power BI Embedded is a specific Azure service that is designed with, or that is intended to be used by the hardcore developer that is going to be developing solutions that require analytics embedded in their applications. So this is going to be strictly used by developers that are developing custom apps that should have reports and dashboards in their app. Now, the users of the app will consume that through the app, but they're not going to be logging into PowerBI.com to view these apps. They're going to be viewing the reports and visualizations through the app, whatever the app is. Okay. Now, Power BI Embedded is managed in the Azure portal, and the pricing for that, it starts at about $1 an hour. So like a lot of the Azure services, you have per hour pricing. Power BI Embedded is no different, right? You have pricing that starts at about $1 an hour. Okay. Now, there's a few different ways to get Power BI embedded in your application. So there's a few different ways you can purchase it. Okay. There's 3 different SKUs here that I'm gonna point out here. You've got the A SKU, the E SKUs, and the P SKUs at the top. The P SKUs represent Power BI Premium. Okay, so I want to point that out. And the A SKUs represent the Power BI embedded service. The E SKUs are a little different. They're kind of in the middle there, but we'll talk about the different features here that you get with the different SKUs. Okay, so the A SKUs are strictly the Power BI embedded Azure service, and all I can do with the A SKUs is embed my content in a custom app. I can't give access to the content through Teams or SharePoint Online. The users can't log in through the Power BI service to view that, but the smallest billing unit is an hour. And that means I can scale up 1 hour, I can scale down the next hour. I can scale up really high, I can pause the service, I can turn it on when I need it, turn it off when I don't need it. So it gives you a lot of flexibility for how you provide visualizations and analytics to your users through your application. Now the eSKUs also support embedding in custom applications, but they also support embedding in SharePoint Online and Teams. The smallest billing unit for an eSKU is at the month level, right? You pay by the month, and you don't have the flexibility to pause that, okay? The PSKU are those that represents Power BI Premium. We talked about that earlier. This gives you the widest range of capabilities. I can embed in custom apps. I can embed in SharePoint Online, Teams. Users can log in through the service. They can log in through the mobile apps. The smallest billing unit is at a month level. So I hope this makes sense when we're thinking about what are the differences between Power BI Embedded, Power BI Premium. When would I use one? When would I use the other? Now, from a costing perspective, the ASKUs are going to give you more flexibility over costing because I can scale up and down by the hour, or I can even pause and turn that off. Power BI Premium gives you less flexibility, but it gives you more capabilities. Less flexibility from a costing perspective, I mean. It gives you more capabilities from what I can do with my content that is on my premium capacity. Okay. Now, so far, everything that we've talked about has been in the cloud. There's one piece here that I want to point out, and it's Power BI Report Server. Now, Power BI Report Server includes a superset of the features included with SQL Server reporting services. So this is a way for me to get some of the capabilities that we have with Power BI on premises. Now, to be clear, it's not Power BI on premises. It's not like we're taking the Power BI service in the cloud and putting it on premises. Power BI Report Server is not Power BI on premises, but it does allow me to host a Power BI desktop report on premises. The Power BI service in the cloud is more than just Power BI desktop, right? It's the reports, it's the Excel documents that I can build there, it's embedding in custom applications, it's the Q&A, it's intelligent insights, it's the integration with the machine learning, right? It's all of these different things, right? And so Power BI Report Server is just a way for me to take a Power BI desktop report and host it on premises. If you've done work with SQL Server reporting services, then you already know 90% of what you need to know about Power BI Report Server. So Power BI Report Server is a superset of the features included with SSRS. Power BI Report Server is everything SSRS has to offer, plus the ability to take a Power BI desktop report and host it in my report portal, okay? So this means that I can host my traditional paginated reports that you're probably familiar with if you know SSRS. I can build my KPIs, I can build my mobile reports, and I can also build my Power BI desktop reports. Now, Power BI Report Server is updated and released about every 4 months. So not quite as aggressive a development cadence as the monthly releases for Power BI Desktop, but Power BI Report Server gets updated and released every 4 months. This is definitely going to be installed and managed by someone in IT, someone that manages your BI environment. But Power users will also be able to modify and develop Power BI reports using Power BI Desktop. Now, Power BI Report Server uses a special version of Power BI Desktop that is separate from the Power BI Desktop version intended for use in the cloud. So if you update Power BI Report Server, you want to make sure you get the latest version of the Power BI Desktop intended for Power BI Report Server. Okay, now there's 2 ways that you can purchase Power BI Report Server. One way is purchase Power BI Premium, right? We talked about Power BI Premium here on the other screen, right? Power BI Premium, one of the advantages that you get with Power BI Premium is that I get Power BI Report Server alongside it. So when you purchase Power BI Premium, you also gain the rights to deploy Power BI Report Server on premises on an equivalent number of CPU based on whatever you purchase, whatever level of Power BI Premium that you purchase. But you can also get Power BI Report Server by purchasing SQL Server Enterprise Edition with software assurance. So if you have SQL Server Enterprise Edition with software assurance, then you're already licensed to deploy Power BI Report Server on that machine, okay? Now, you can download Power BI Report Server development edition of it for free. I got the link here in the chat window. And you'll see here, this is a screenshot of what the Power BI Report Server portal looks like. I've got the SSRS KPIs, right? I've got the mobile reports. I've got the paginated reports. I've got my Excel workbooks, got my shared data sources right, and I've got some Power BI reports here in it. And when I click on that report, it'll open up here in my browser, just like all the other reports do. Now, users that want to edit the reports, the editing doesn't happen in the browser like it does in the Power BI service. Anyone editing or designing the reports are going to be required to have Power BI Desktop downloaded and installed on their machine. Also, users that are doing development and sharing of content in Power BI Report Server are required to have a pro license. Now, the next screen I'm going to share here with you is a little bit of an eye chart, but I wanted to make sure that we put this in here because it gives you a breakdown of where Power BI Report Server and the Power BI service are different. Okay, and the reason I put this in here is because a lot of customers don't understand that Power BI Report Server and Power BI service are not the same. Aside from one being on premises and one being in the cloud, they're just not the same. There's a lot of differences from a capabilities and a functionality perspective. And so I wanted to make sure that I put this here in the slide deck so that way you can come through this and read this in more detail. But a couple things I'll point out here. The release cycle between these is different. Power BI Report Server gets updated every 4 months. Power BI Service gets updated once a month. Okay, so that's a big difference, okay? Another one, creating Power BI reports in the browser is only possible in the Power BI service, not in Power BI Report Server yet, okay? Power BI data models that you publish in the Power BI service, you can browse those with Excel, right? We talked about that. That's currently not possible with Power BI Report Server. Another big difference, if you are heavily using email subscriptions for paginated reports and distributing those as PDF documents in emails or to file shares, right, then you're going to want to use Power BI Report Server for that. Power BI Service doesn't currently have those features. Now that stuff is coming down the pipe, but it's currently not there, okay? If you're interested in getting the latest features and playing with the latest preview features, that all comes available first in the Power BI Service, not in the Power BI Report Server. There's also a big difference between Power BI Desktop. Oops, didn't mean to cross that out. There's 2 versions of Power BI Desktop, one that is optimized for Report Server and one that's optimized for the Power BI service. So depending on which one you're using, you want to make sure that you've got the right version of the Power BI Report Server downloaded and installed. Okay. All right. The mobile apps, you've got all the mobile apps are free to download on iOS, Android, Windows. These can be managed using Microsoft Intune. And these are used to view reports and dashboards that are in the Power BI service, as well as reports that are on Power BI Report Server. So if you want to give access to users from whatever device they're using, you can download the Power BI apps on iOS, Android, Windows Phone, and get access to your Power BI reports. If you're using the Power BI service, all a user has to do is download the app, log in, and they've automatically got access to all the reports and dashboards that they've got permissions on. So this is a great way for you to expose your content to your authorized users on their mobile device without a lot of management, without a lot of effort, but still in a secure way. Okay. The last thing that I'll point out here is the Power BI Common Data Service. You've probably heard of this lately if you've been following along with Power BI, but traditionally to solve for big data challenges, you would have to connect to data, ingest all the data from these separate places into one big data store like a data warehouse, like Azure Data Lake or something like that. You transform and ingest the data, you map and integrate the disparate data elements and by developing some sort of common schema, right, like a data warehouse. And then you have to automate this entire process so that the integrated data sets are refreshed every time the underlying data changes. And that whole process together is normally referred to as data warehousing, right? And it's a ton of work. Now, the Common Data Service uses basically as a way for us to use a known schema and data model instance from which reports and dashboards and natural language queries and other quick insight analytics can automatically be created. The data that you bring into the Common Data Service and analytics is held in your organization's tenant, and it uses a specified schema and data model to facilitate the creation of ready-made analytics in Power BI. So think of the Common Data Service as one place for me to integrate disparate data sources in a very controlled and managed way and still facilitate self-service capabilities. It's a standardized, extensible business app schema to support data integration and analytics. It's going to be available for Power BI Pro and Power BI Premium eventually, but it's not quite available yet. But that's something I wanted to share with you so that way you're aware of what's coming down the pipe. There's a link down in the bottom of the slide that lets you sign up in case you want to be notified when new updates are published on the Common Data Service. So I did want to share that with you. Okay. So that's everything in the ecosystem. I hope that gives you a good overview of the ecosystem. Download the image here. Also the slides and everything along with this are available on my blog. The diagram here is available on SQLDusty.com. You can download that from my blog post. There's all my social media information. There's my email address. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me on social media. I hope you will, and I love interacting with the community on social media. And if you have questions, you want to send me an email, you can do that too. There's my email address. But we'll wrap here. We've got about 5 minutes left. I hope some of you have some good questions, and we'll open the floor for questions now.
All right, perfect. I'm going to go ahead and read off some of the questions. Dustin, can you see them on your end or no?
Let me see. I think I can. It's very small, though.
If you hit the corner, the little square with the arrow.
All right. There we go. I need to make it bigger. All right. There we go. Yep.
All right, perfect. Just didn't know
that you
want to tackle, or if you want me to go ahead and read them off for you, or however you want.
Yeah, here we go. Let's see. All right. What about app workspaces publication? That question was from Howard. Howard, we talked about the app workspaces in the publication. I'm not sure what the question is about, but we talked about the app workspaces at the very beginning. Maybe you weren't logged on for that, but the app workspaces are basically the collaboration environments for reports that are that you want to share with other users, right? So I can set up an app workspace, I can add some membership to the app workspace, and then I can publish that out into an app, right? Okay, let's see. Then somebody had a question that said, how do we share Power BI reports with external users? Okay, well, the Power BI service has the ability to share content with external users. That question is from Rajendra. If you want to look up, if you go to Google, Power BI Publish to Web, that's the feature you want to take a look at. Publish to Web is how you can expose Power BI content publicly for anonymous access. Now, that's public and anonymous access. If you want to share content securely with external users, then you need to use you need to take a look at Power BI B2B, and that is basically a way for me to share content with a user that is external to my organization, but you definitely have that capability in Power BI. Rajinder said, well, can we apply RLS to external users? Yes, you can apply the RLS to the external users too. And it's really how the external sharing works is really cool. But it basically creates a guest user in your Azure Active Directory, and it's a guest user, but you still have the ability to have row-level security applied for those external users. Okay. Let's see. are there different versions of Power BI Desktop for Power BI Report Server and Power BI Service? Are there any differences in features between the two versions? That question is from Azar. Yes, there are different versions of Power BI Desktop for those. There are some differences in features between the two services, or between the two versions of Power BI Desktop. You can take a look at the documentation on that, but there are two different versions of Power BI Desktop that you'd need to use depending on whether you're using the Power BI Service or the Power BI Report Server. Okay. Let's see. What is needed to use an Azure Data Lake as a data source? That question was from Mark. If you have Data Lake and you want to use that as a data source, Power BI can natively connect into Data Lake. So if you're using Data Lake to aggregate data and clean it up and put it out in different formats, right? You can connect to any file that you're using in the Data Lake with the Power BI service. Now, is that the best way to leverage data in the Data Lake? I personally don't think so. I would rather put something on top of Data Lake like Azure Analysis Services, and then let Power BI connect to analysis services. But Power BI service does have the ability to connect to data that is in the Data Lake. So just a thing there. But if you have some questions about that, feel free to send me a tweet or something, Mark. And there's some great sample architectures out there about how do you leverage Data Lake with Power BI. Okay. Let's see. Man, there's a lot of questions there. I'm trying to see what questions we have available in here. All right. Is there a good way to build a well-organized portal of reports? Yep, so that question's from Will. There are some recommendations on how do you build a well-organized portal of reports. If you take a look at, if you go to PowerBI.com and you look at the documentation and you look at dashboards and things, you want to take a look at dashboards which are developed only in the Power BI service. And dashboards are a great way for you to facilitate exposing a large number of reports to a group of users. Because what I can do with a dashboard is I can build in tiles that allow me to hyperlink to specific reports or specific pages of reports. So those tiles can include videos, they can include text, they can include hyperlinks, they can include images, they can include visualizations that users can click on and then take them to specific places. So look at the dashboards and think about how you can use dashboards to facilitate sort of a landing page for all the Power BI reports and content that you want to share with your users. Okay. All right, last question. Is Power BI B2B available for pro users or is premium needed? So the Power BI B2B, it doesn't require premium, but if you're not using premium, then you're going to need a pro license for that. The cool thing about Power BI B2B is that that user can bring their own pro license, or you can assign them a pro license even if they're an external user. But if you look up Power BI B2B, Chin, then you'll see all the requirements and documentation on that. Okay, we're about at the end of time here. Thank you so much for everybody that attended. Thank you for Pragmatic Works for hosting this. I greatly appreciate that. And this was a great event. You guys had lots of good questions. If there's any other questions you guys have, feel free to send me a tweet or something, and I'll be happy to discuss that. But thank you everybody for attending. You can download all the slides and everything from SQLDusty.com. Thank you everybody.
Thank you, Dustin. I appreciate it. And thanks for everyone, like Dustin said, for attending the webinar. And as he said, all the slides are previously recorded. You guys can download them too as well. You guys should receive a link tomorrow in you guys' email with the whole entire webinar in there. Thanks so much for attending. I hope you guys have a great day.
Thank you, Crystal. Thanks for hosting.
No problem. Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.